My name is Jeff Craemer.
And what is your connection to Marin County history?
Well, I was born here in San Rafael, just down the street at San Rafael General Hospital, and lived here all my life. And my family owned the Independent Journal newspaper. My grandfather bought it in the 30s, and I was subject to knowing and being taught about the history of the county all my life by various people who were heirs or founding families of the county. I became involved in the museum because I love Marin history and this old building and the exhibits, and the staff does a wonderful job of telling the story of Marin. And when I was a younger boy, my father hired a woman, Florence Donnelly, to be his society editor, and Florence is one of the founders and the first president of this organization. And she, as I was a young boy being at the newspaper, she really put Marin history in my head and introduced me to people and events and places, and I'd read her stories that she wrote in the paper and was fascinated by it. Well, I think every exhibit they did was a good one. Of course, I think it was the one I really had a lot of fun with, was the railroad exhibit, because Marin was brought together and grew by way of the railroad, and they've had numerous other ones of founding families in Marin and the newspaper and like that. And the staff puts their professionalism to a task, and they do a good job at it presenting this. So when the public comes in, they see it, and I know when I come by and read the captions and the pictures again, I'm always learning something more myself, because they do such a marvelous job of presenting it to everybody. Years ago, the courthouse had ledgers. So when you pay taxes, your taxes were recorded by your name and what you paid. And a fellow called me and said, "I've got some ledgers for you that came from the courthouse." So I agreed that I would purchase these. Well, printed on the ledger in block letters on the cover, it said Hazard County Bank. And these were taken out of the courthouse somehow, and in Dukes of Hazzard, they just flipped through the pages on a scene, and that was it. And the book closed, it said Hazard County Bank, and they used it in the facility. And they needed a prop. The movie was done, the series, and it got put away, and he found out from a prop room where it came from. It came back to here. And along those same lines, I found from this gentleman another ledger, and it was a tax ledger for the taxes you would pay for running an establishment that served alcohol. And there was places at Taylorville, in Tocaloma, the winery out in San Anselmo, and on and on. Every place that we hear about, there it is, your taxes and what it is. And there's people that, it was just an interesting find of names and events. Being a collector myself of antique printing equipment, you always get people that have some material, and I kind of collected Marin stuff on the side. But when I gave that collection away, the bug to collect this stuff was still in me, and I knew there was a lot of Marin stuff out there, and it like any other collection, if it doesn't get rounded up and housed in a proper space where it can be displayed, it could have been lost forever. And I was very fortunate to know some people that had some of this material that would either donate it or part with it so the museum can have it. And a perfect example, I know a lady here and her husband in San Rafael, and his mother was out in Olima and at the Shafter residence. And so when the Shafters sold that, I think the family bought it, and they started taking it apart and found book after book and pile after pile of documents that Shafter had from the San Francisco North Pacific Coast Radio, original plot maps for the Inverness subdivision that Julius Shafter had, and on and on and on. And these were just treasures that, had they been laying there, or somebody had come along, well, let's get rid of this stuff, you don't have it to document or use it for research later on. I remember Warren Redding and William Vanderbilt because of their history into the county, and even Florence Donnelly. I learned so much from them. And there were some other folks, I can't recall the name, but everybody, and Frank Galley, gosh, he was a name, institutional, but he was really into the institutional, and Jack Mason. And I knew Scott Polland, and Dr. Stanley. They were a good influence on me because I knew them, and they chose some wonderful stories about the county and about the museum and how important it is to the future, saving the past for the future, to tell the story of Marin, future generations from the past. Jerry Coble was a very wonderful person to know and work with. I knew Jerry back when I was in grammar school. When I was in the 7th grade at Kent School, he taught history, and we had world history drummed into our heads. And Jerry was just a likable guy, and we kind of parted our ways, and then it wasn't until I came back here and the previous curator told me about Mr. Coble, and I said, who? And filled me in, and one day I came in and she said, oh, he's upstairs, and I went in and like a couple of long lost friends, but he had left Kent and worked for Tam High School District out at Drake. So I went over there and visited him, and he said, I've got something I want to give you. And he handed me a report where he wanted his kids to know about Marin, so he'd make them assignments. And I gave one of my students an assignment on the Hotel Raffel, which was long gone, burned down in the 20s, and handed me a typewritten script. I just heard about it and saw pictures of it, and he really had an effect on me as a warm individual who cared and wanted to share his knowledge and history with other people. And I do miss the guy. I think it's fun to volunteer to be part and know the history of the county and the exhibits and of this building, the gatehouse, and being able to pass it on to future generations. And what I enjoy about it, when people come in and we have an exhibit here that's fascinating, is you learn about it and then you pass on your own experiences to people being, a native of Marin and still being able to remember all this stuff and how the county was 40, 50 years ago or longer, and then remember even further from people you remember as to how built up it is today.